The air at the Atherton Gala crackled with the energy of $10 billion. This was a room where empires were built and destroyed over cocktails. Richard Vance, a tech mogul bathing in the glow of his own success, leaned in and publicly laughed at his wife, Eleanor. He called her his little brown mouse, a relic from his past he couldn't quite shake. But Richard was about to make a fatal mistake. He didn't know that the party's guest of honor, the mysterious trillion-dollar benefactor everyone was hunting, was the very woman he had just tried to erase. Tonight, the spotlight would find her, and the laughter would stop forever. The Celeste Grand Ballroom was a constellation of earthly gods. Its vaulted ceilings, painted with frescoes that rivaled the Sistine, looked down on a sea of custom, Schiaparelli, Tom Ford, and legacy jewels that hadn't seen a vault in decades. This was the 10th annual Atherton Foundation Gala, the absolute pinnacle of New York's philanthropic and financial calendar. Getting a ticket wasn't about money, it was about power. It meant you were either someone, or you were courting someone who mattered. Richard Rick Vance mattered. Or at least, he'd bludgeoned Silicon Valley into believing he did. At 42, he was a titan of new money, the brash, charismatic CEO of Apex Dynamics. He moved through the crowd like a shark, all teeth and expensive cologne. His Brioni tuxedo was so sharply tailored it looked like sculpted obsidian. He was currently holding court with Martin Thorne, a skeletal old-money venture capitalist from Sequoia Capital, and Isabella Dubois, the most feared and revered social columnist from Vogue. "The key to the Vanguard Trust," Richard was saying, his voice booming with a confidence that bordered on assault, "isn't their tech, it's their fear. This EV, they're terrified of being irrelevant. My pitch tonight proves that Apex is the only future. They'd be fools not to give us the grant." Isabella, draped in gold lame, tapped a manicured finger on her champagne flute. "The rumors are flying, Rick. Forbes is estimating the EV. Trust is sitting on a $50 billion liquid fund. They say EV is here tonight, anonymously." "Of course they are," Richard scoffed, "and they're here to see me." He glanced over his shoulder. "God, I need another drink. Ellie, champagne." He was looking at his wife, Eleanor Vance. If Richard was a supernova, Eleanor was a shadow. She stood near a towering marble column, half hidden by a potted fig tree. Her dress? It was confusing. In a room of bespoke couture, she wore a simple, charcoal-grey vintage gown. It was high-necked, long-sleeved, and utterly devoid of sparkle. It might have been the Row, or it might have been from a thrift store. To Richard, it was just sad. Her mousy brown hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her only jewelry was a thin, worn gold band. She wasn't mingling. She was observing. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. The desperate hunger in a young CEO's eyes, the subtle hand squeeze between a senator and a lobbyist, the way Isabella Dubois' smile never, ever reached her eyes. At his shout, she flinched. She picked up a fresh glass from a passing tray and began to weave her way through the glittering crowd. As she approached, Martin Thorne leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "My God, Rick," Martin murmured, looking at Eleanor. "You build rockets, but you can't get your wife into a Dior? She looks academic." Richard let out a sharp, cruel laugh. It was a sound designed to include his companions and exclude its target. "That's my Ellie," he said, loud enough for her to hear as she arrived. He took the glass from her hand without looking at her. "She's my little brown mouse, built for the library, not the ballroom. Aren't you, dear?" Eleanor froze. The smile on Isabella Dubois' face was predatory. Martin Thorne chuckled politely. "She's the brains, I'm just the face," Richard continued, patting her on the shoulder with a dismissive thud. "But brains are for spreadsheets, not, well, this. She's more comfortable with a regression analysis than an Armani." He turned back to his group. "Now, as I was saying about the Vanguard pitch." He had turned his back on her, entirely. The laughter, though muted, felt like a slap. Isabella Dubois was already discreetly typing into her phone, no doubt crafting a poison pen aside for her column. Richard Vance, shining bright, while his dowdy wife, Eleanor, served as a living shadow. Eleanor stood there for a full 10 seconds, the heat rising in her cheeks. He hadn't just insulted her. He had erased her. He had reduced her to a punchline, a piece of dowdy furniture he was forced to drag along. She didn't say a word. She simply turned, her back straight, and walked away from the circle of laughter. She melted back toward the columns, her face a mask of calm. But beneath the vintage wool, her hands were clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms, drawing blood. He had laughed, in front of everyone. Richard, busy preening, didn't notice the look in her eyes. He didn't see the ice forming. He had forgotten one crucial fundamental fact. A mouse, when cornered, will still bite. And Eleanor wasn't a mouse. She was a trap, patiently waiting to spring. The woman known as Eleanor Vance didn't exist, not really. The real woman was Eleanor Sinclair, and Eleanor Sinclair was a ghost. Their story, the one Richard told, was a classic Silicon Valley fable. He'd been a charismatic, broke coder at Stanford. She'd been a quiet, brilliant post-grad in computational mathematics. He had the vision. She had the technical skills. He'd sketched the idea for apex dynamics on a napkin. She'd helped him build the code. The reality was far less romantic. Eleanor, retreating to a quiet alcove overlooking the terrace, let the memory surface. It was a memory she kept locked away. But tonight, the laughter had broken the seal. Stanford, 2008. The data lab. Richard wasn't a coder. He was a marketing major with a decent grasp of Python. She was the prodigy. She was the one who authored the Sinclair resonance algorithm, a revolutionary piece of predictive AI that could model market volatility with 99.8% accuracy. It was her doctoral thesis. It was her life's work. Richard hadn't sketched it on a napkin. He had read her thesis. He'd seduced her. Not with looks, but with attention. He was the first person who seemed to see her, and not just her brain. He listened. He praised her. He told her she was a genius who deserved to change the world, not just write papers about it. "We can build this, Ellie," he'd whispered to her, his eyes blazing with borrowed ambition. "You and me. We'll make Apple look like a lemonade stand." She'd believed him. She, the girl who understood quantum mechanics but not human deceit, had fallen completely. They founded Apex Dynamics. For the first 2 years they were partners. She coded. He sold. They got married in a courthouse, celebrating with pizza. But the moment the first check from Andreessen Horowitz cleared, the shift began. Subtly, at first. The investors are more comfortable with one face, baby. You hate the meetings anyway. Let me handle the front end. We should list the primary patent under my name. It's just cleaner for the corporation. We're married, Ellie. What's mine is yours, right? It's just a piece of paper. Babe, Forbes wants an interview. I don't think you should do it. They'll ask all those technical questions and you get lost in the weeds. I'll give them the big picture. In 5 years, history was rewritten. The Sinclair resonance algorithm became the Apex predictive engine. Her thesis became early exploratory work commissioned by Richard Vance. Her name went from co-founder to Chief Technical Advisor, to simply Mrs. Vance. He didn't just steal her work, he gaslighted her into handing it to him, convincing her it was for their benefit, all while he was systematically erasing her from their own story. Now he was a billionaire, and she was the little brown mouse. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Eleanor had seen the change coming. She wasn't just a genius, she was a pragmatist. 8 years ago, during their Series B funding, she had quietly, legally, and without his knowledge, sold her original pre-marriage, pre-apex patents. Not all of them, but the core, the original mathematical proofs. She sold them not for cash, but for a complex series of equity swaps, funneling the proceeds into an anonymous, offshore blind trust. It had been her escape hatch. The sale had netted her $400 million. For 8 years, that $400 million had been her secret. She'd lived in Richard's shadow, playing the part of the quiet, academic wife. But in the dark, she wasn't Ellie. She was Evie. She'd taken her seed money and, using her own algorithms, began investing. She didn't invest in stocks. She invested in futures, in disruptive tech, in humanitarian solutions. Her fund, the Vanguard Philanthropic Trust, grew. It grew exponentially. From 400 million it became $1 billion, then 10 billion, then 50. It was the most successful and most mysterious philanthropic fund on Earth. And tonight, Evie was to be the guest of honor. Richard's current obsession was winning the Vanguard grant, a $100 million prize for ethical technological advancement. For the last 6 months, he had been rehearsing his pitch. He had rehearsed it to her. Eleanor closed her eyes, the memory of last week stinging. Richard, pacing their sterile, white-on-white living room. PowerPoint gleaming on the 8K screen. "Okay, Ellie, listen up. Pretend you're Evie. You're this mysterious, brilliant, probably a man, investor. You're looking for the next big thing." He'd spent an hour using technical terms she had taught him, mangling them, boasting about his algorithm. "What do you think?" he'd asked, breathless and arrogant. "The data on slide 28. It's flawed," she'd said quietly. "Your carbon capture projection is projecting a 40% efficiency that isn't supported by the raw data. It looks inflated." Richard's face had darkened. "Jesus, Ellie, can you just be a wife for 1 second? I don't need a critical analysis. I need support. It's a pitch, not a dissertation." "It's fine. What do you know about carbon capture anyway?" He'd dismissed her, just as he dismissed her now. She opened her eyes, looking out over the glittering Manhattan skyline. The laughter still echoed in her ears. He hadn't just laughed at her dress. He had laughed at the very brains he had stolen, the intellect he was now trying to pitch to for money. The irony was so sharp, it was almost suffocating. He thought he was hunting the lion while living in a cage with the lioness. "He's right," she whispered to the empty terrace. "I am built for the library, and the library is where you find the truth." And tonight, she thought, the truth was finally being checked out. The ballroom was electric with a single question. Who is Evie? The very idea of a new $50 billion player in this ecosystem was enough to send shockwaves through the financial world. The Vanguard Trust wasn't like the Gates Foundation or the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. It was fast, ruthless, and anonymous. It funded the strange, brilliant, and impossible. It had cured 2 incurable diseases, funded a renegade fusion project, and anonymously paid the legal fees for a Reuters journalist imprisoned in Russia. And tonight, Evie was in this room. Isabella Dubois had moved on from Richard and was now holding court by the raw bar. A circle of anxious, hopeful people surrounded her, desperate for a crumb of information. "My sources at the Financial Times," Isabella announced, "say EV is a committee, a think tank of ex-Google and DeepMind engineers who cashed out and went rogue." "Nonsense," countered a hedge fund manager, gesturing with an oyster. "It's one person. It has to be. The moves are too singular. I'm betting on an exiled Chinese prodigy, someone who escaped the CCP with $1 trillion in crypto." Richard Vance swaggered into the group, having refreshed his champagne. "You're all wrong. It's not a committee, and it's not some kid in a hoodie. It's old money. Someone from the Rockefeller or Vanderbilt line, ashamed of their family name, trying to buy back their karma." He beamed, enjoying his own performance. "But it doesn't matter who EV is. What matters is who EV chooses, and the Vanguard grant is tailor-made for Apex Dynamics." Martin Thorne, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. His voice was a dry rattle. "Don't be so certain, Rick. I've studied the trust's investments. They're particular. They seem to have an obsession with ethics." "Ethics?" Richard laughed. "Ethics is just a branding exercise. We've got the best carbon capture tech on the planet. We're saving the world. What's more ethical than that? We're a lock." "Are you?" Martin's eyes were thin slits. "I heard a rumor, a nasty one actually, that your revolutionary carbon capture tech is just a rebrand of a failed 2010 project. I hear it doesn't scale, and I hear you're about to pour $200 million into acquiring the shell company that holds the fraudulent patent." Richard's smile tightened. The color drained slightly from his face. "That's a lie. Slander. My tech is sound." "Is it, Rick? Or is it just a creative metric for a pitch? Because Evie strikes me as the kind of person who, well, reads the spreadsheets." The barb, a clear echo of Richard's own jibe at his wife, hung in the air. Richard was saved from responding by a sudden commotion. Jack Atherton, the evening's host, had taken the stage. Jack was the physical embodiment of old money. Tall, silver-haired, and exuding a quiet authority that made Richard's brashness look cheap, he commanded the room without raising his voice. He was the only man in New York who could quiet this crowd, just by clearing his throat. "My generous friends," Jack's voice resonated, warm and clear. "Thank you. Thank you for your incredible support tonight. You have, in just 2 hours, raised over $20 million for the foundation." A polite, self-congratulatory applause. "But now," Jack continued, "we come to a very special part of our evening. For 5 years, the Vanguard Trust has been a powerful, anonymous force for good. Tonight, the founder of that trust, EV, has decided it's time to step into the light." A collective, audible gasp swept the room. Every phone was instantly raised. This was it. "EV is here," Jack said, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "And they will be personally announcing the winner of the inaugural $100 million Vanguard grant." Richard Vance was physically vibrating with anticipation. He smoothed his tuxedo. He adjusted his bow tie. He shot a look at Martin Thorne that screamed, "I told you so." He was so consumed by his own impending triumph that he didn't see his wife, Eleanor, slip out of her alcove and move toward the side of the ballroom. He didn't see her catch Jack Atherton's eye, and he didn't see the host give her a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Eleanor didn't go straight to the stage. She needed air. Just one more minute of anonymity. The weight of what she was about to do, to her life, to her marriage, to Richard, was crushing. She found herself on the quieter, less crowded terrace, where the chill October air was a welcome shock. She leaned against the balustrade, the city lights a million miles below. He laughed at me. She hadn't realized she'd said it aloud until she heard a small, shaky voice answer her. Men like that, they don't laugh, they bray. Eleanor turned. Huddled on a stone bench, trying to make herself small, was a young woman in her late 20s. She wore a simple black dress that was clearly off the rack, and her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. She was nervously fiddling with a tablet. She was clearly one of the scholarship attendees, a scientist or artist invited to mingle, like a sacrificial lamb to the lions. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, her voice soft. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "Oh God, no, I'm sorry," the woman said, wiping her eyes. "I'm not supposed to be out here. I'm supposed to be networking. I'm Dr. Aris Thorne." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "Thorne? Are you related to Martin?" Aris let out a bitter little laugh. "He's my father. He does not approve of my niche work. He thinks I'm a failure because I'd rather be in a lab than on a trading floor. He got me an invite tonight to show me what real success looks like. And I feel like such an imposter." Eleanor sat down, a respectful distance away. "You're not an imposter. You're just in the wrong room. What's your work?" "It's stupid," Aris mumbled, gesturing to a tablet. "It's predictive protein folding. I'm trying to design a custom enzyme that can eat microplastics, but the models keep collapsing. The error margin on the sensor calibration is too high. I can't get the protein to stabilize. It's all pointless." She was beginning to cry again. Eleanor, the little brown mouse who was built for the library, felt a genuine spark of interest for the first time all night. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the tablet. Aris, looking surprised, handed it over. "I don't know if you... It's pretty technical." Eleanor's fingers flew across the screen. Her eyes scanned lines of code, complex molecular diagrams, and data logs. The nervous, dowdy wife disappeared. In her place was a laser-focused intellect. She was silent for 2 minutes. Aris watched, her breath held. "You're not using a Bayesian filter," Eleanor said, almost to herself. "What?" "Your calibration. You're using a standard Kalman filter, but your data inputs are non-linear. You're getting signal drift," Eleanor explained, her voice gaining a quiet confidence. "Your protein isn't unstable. Your sensor is lying to you. Look." She typed a new string of code. "If you recalibrate the sensor data post-process, right here, and apply a recursive Bayesian filter, you're not just correcting the drift. You're using the noise as a predictive variable." She handed the tablet back. Aris Thorne stared at the screen. Her jaw dropped. The model? It wasn't collapsing. It was stabilizing. In 30 seconds, this quiet woman, in a sad dress, had just solved a problem that had consumed Aris's life and her entire PhD grant for 3 years. My God," Aris whispered, her voice full of awe. That's brilliant. It works. Who are you? Are you with DeepMind, JPL?" Eleanor stood up. She gave the young scientist a small, genuine smile. "No," she said. "I'm just Ellie, and I'm a fan of good data. Don't let your father, or anyone else in that room, tell you your work is niche, Dr. Thorne. Your work is everything." She turned to go back inside. "Wait," Aris called. "Who are you?" Eleanor paused at the door. "I'm just a guest. But you, Dr. Thorne, you're a revolutionary. Don't forget it." She walked back into the ballroom, her moment of hesitation gone. The ice in her veins had set. Richard hadn't just insulted her. He and his kind, the Martin Thornes of the world, were the ones who laughed at the real work. They were the ones who dismissed the Aris Thornes. They weren't just arrogant. They were dinosaurs. and they didn't even see the meteor. As Eleanor re-entered the ballroom, the atmosphere was thick. Jack Atherton was still on stage, drawing out the suspense. Evie is not just a benefactor, Jack was saying. They are an architect, a quiet visionary who has... He spotted Eleanor. A man in a simple black suit, clearly Jack's personal security, materialized at her side. "Dr. Vance, Mr. Atherton asked me to escort you." He didn't lead her to her table. He led her to the small, velvet-curtained alcove just off stage. Jack, seeing her arrive, wrapped up his speech. A person who believes in substance over style, in data over dogma. And now, I'm going to turn the microphone over to them. Jack stepped off the stage and pulled the curtain aside. He was the only person on earth, besides her lawyers, who knew her secret. He had been the one to help her set up the trust's charter. "Are you ready, my dear?" he asked, his eyes kind but firm. Eleanor took a deep breath. "I don't know, Jack. He's particularly awful tonight." "I know. I heard what he said," Jack replied, his voice hardening. "That's precisely why it must be tonight." "The board agrees, Eleanor. The anonymous phase is over. The trust needs a face. Your face. And there's another reason." "What is it?" "Martin Thorne wasn't just spreading rumors. My office got a tip from the SEC. Richard is leveraging Apex stock to acquire that fraudulent carbon capture company. The deal is set to close at midnight. He's using your assets, Eleanor, the stock that's still in your name. He's about to light half your net worth on fire to cover up his first failure." Eleanor's blood ran cold. The man she'd married wasn't just an arrogant fool, he was a desperate criminal. He was about to commit massive fraud. "He's not just laughing at you, Eleanor," Jack said, his hand on her shoulder. "He's robbing you. Again. You must stop him." The hesitation vanished. This was no longer just about public humiliation or stolen credit. This was survival. This was justice. "He won't stop," Eleanor said, her voice a flat, cold line. "He'll drag us both into ruin just to protect his own ego." "Yes, he will," Jack said. "Unless you cut the rope." He gestured to the stage. "The world is waiting, Evie." Eleanor looked past him, into the ballroom. She saw Richard. He was on his feet, preening. He was whispering to the man at the next table, grinning, pointing to the stage as if he owned it. He was so sure, so absolutely, blindingly certain that the world revolved around him. She straightened her spine. The little brown mouse was gone. The woman who stepped out from behind the curtain was Dr. Eleanor Sinclair. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jack Atherton said, stepping back to the microphone. A hush swept the room. "It is my profound, personal honor to introduce the founder, the architect, and the conscience of the Vanguard Trust. Please welcome Dr. Eleanor Vance." Silence. Not polite silence. Not anticipatory silence. It was a vacuum, a deep, profound, deafening void of sound. Every jaw in the Celeste ballroom had dropped. Richard Vance, who had literally just taken one step toward the aisle, froze. His brain short-circuited. He looked at Jack, a confused, angry scowl on his face. Did he say Vance? Did he get the name wrong? Did he mean Richard Vance? He turned, searching for his wife. And then it happened. The main spotlight, a brilliant, sharp circle of white, swung off the stage. It swept across the first few tables, a blade of light cutting through the anxious darkness. It passed over senators. It passed over billionaires. And it landed. It landed directly on Eleanor, standing perfectly still by the side of the stage. She was no longer in the shadows. She was illuminated, her simple grey dress seeming to glow. Her face, which Richard had always called plain, was now riveting. It was calm, it was intelligent, and it was absolutely, terrifyingly resolved. What the hell? Richard whispered. He looked around. Is this a joke? Is she accepting it for me? Isabella Dubois, for the first time in her professional life, was speechless. Her pen was frozen over her notepad. Martin Thorne's eyes had widened to the size of dinner plates. He looked from Eleanor to Richard and back, and a slow, dawning comprehension and sheer, unadulterated joy spread across his thin face. "Ellie," Richard barked, his voice cracking. "What are you doing? Sit down! You're making a fool of yourself!" But she didn't move. She just watched him. Jack Atherton smiled. "Dr. Vance, the stage is yours." As if in a dream, Eleanor walked the few steps to the podium. The click of her simple heels on the stage floor was the only sound in the room. The cameras, which had been aimed at the stage, were now all turned, focusing on her. The flashes began, a frantic, epileptic strobe of light. She reached the microphone. She adjusted it slightly down, a small, powerful gesture. She looked out at the sea of stunned, priceless faces. And then her eyes found Richard. He was standing, his face a grotesque mask of confusion and rage. "Good evening," Eleanor said. Her voice, never raised, was now amplified, filling every corner of the room. It was clear, steady, and held the resonance of pure, cold steel. "My name is Eleanor Vance, or, as I was known in my academic life, Dr. Eleanor Sinclair." Richard took a step forward. "Ellie, get off the stage. You're embarrassing me." A few people tittered, nervously. This was a marital spat. This was bizarre. Eleanor didn't look at him. She looked at the crowd. "My friends call me Ellie. My grandmother, however, always called me E.V." The gasp was so loud, it created a breeze. 8 years ago," Eleanor continued, her voice cutting through the shock, "I sold the core patents for a predictive algorithm I authored. I used that seed money to found a small, exploratory investment fund. I wanted to see if it was possible to invest in humanitarian solutions and still see exponential growth. That fund became the Vanguard Trust." The room erupted. It wasn't applause. It was a roar of voices, of shock, of 1,000 conversations starting at once. "That's a lie!" Richard roared. He was trying to push past his table, but he was so enraged, he stumbled. She's confused. She's my wife. She manages the household." "Order," Jack Atherton said, stepping forward. But Eleanor held up a hand. She didn't need his help. She looked directly at her husband. The spotlight was now shared, illuminating her at the podium and him, scrambling in the middle of the ballroom. The hunter and the prey. "My husband, Richard, is correct about one thing," Eleanor said, her voice dangerously quiet. "He is the face of Apex Dynamics. He's a brilliant salesman." She paused, letting the compliment hang, and then twist. "He has been pitching me for the last 6 months for the Vanguard grant. He's been practicing in our living room." A new sound. Laughter. Not the cruel, dismissive laughter from earlier. This was the sharp, shocked laughter of irony. "His pitch," Eleanor said, "was very creative, particularly the data on his new carbon capture project." Richard had gone white. He wasn't yelling anymore. He was frozen. "Unfortunately," Eleanor said, "Apex Dynamics will not be receiving the Vanguard grant. The Trust's ethics charter, which I authored, specifically prohibits funding companies with, let's call them, significant leadership integrity issues." It was a public execution. Isabella Dubois was typing so fast her phone was clicking. "And," Eleanor said, "it especially prohibits funding companies that are actively engaged in shareholder fraud." The word fraud landed in the room and detonated. This was no longer a social drama. This was a crime. This was an SEC filing. This was billions of dollars vanishing. You bitch, Richard hissed. The word was not amplified, but in the new, terrified silence, it carried. Mr. Vance, Eleanor said, addressing him as if he were a stranger. The fraudulent patent Mr. Thorne mentioned earlier? The one you're acquiring for $200 million at midnight, using leveraged Apex stock. I know all about it. She looked at the crowd. He's right. It's a failed technology, a shell company. He's doing it to hide a catastrophic Q3 loss from the board, a loss he incurred by ignoring the regression analysis of his little brown mouse. She turned back to Richard. The spotlight was entirely hers now. He was just a man in the dark. You seem to have forgotten something, Richard. When you cleaned up the corporate structure, you put 40% of the primary shares in my name. What's mine is yours, babe, I believe you said. Her face was void of all emotion. As the majority, and until now, silent, shareholder of Apex Dynamics, I have just filed an emergency injunction with the SEC and the Southern District of New York. As of 9:15 p.m., a federal judge has frozen all of Apex's assets, pending a criminal investigation. The midnight deal is dead. Richard Vance made a sound, a small, choking noise. He wasn't a shark. He was a beached whale, suffocating. And, Eleanor finished, I have filed an emergency motion with the board to remove you as CEO, effective immediately, for cause. He didn't just stumble, he collapsed. He physically fell back into his chair, his hands shaking, his billion-dollar empire turning to dust in front of 1,000 witnesses. Eleanor turned away from the wreckage of her husband. Her work there was done. The Vanguard Trust was not founded to punish, she said, her voice softening. It was founded to build. The men who run this world, she glanced at Martin Thorne, are often obsessed with success. They laugh at niche work. They dismiss the academic. They are wrong. She looked out, scanning the crowd. Where is Dr. Oris Thorne? On the terrace, Aris, who had been watching, stunned, through the glass, flinched. She stepped forward. A secondary spotlight found her. Dr. Thorne, Eleanor said, a genuine smile finally gracing her lips. Your work on microplastic-eating enzymes is not niche. It is revolutionary. The Vanguard Trust is awarding its inaugural $100 million grant to you. Aris Thorne burst into tears. Martin Thorne, her father, looked at his daughter, really looked at her, for what might have been the first time. He was speechless. The room, finally, exploded. This time it was applause, a thunderous, standing ovation. Not for the money, but for the story, for the justice, for the mouse that had become a lion. Eleanor raised her hand. My work is just beginning. Thank you. She stepped down from the stage. The applause was not polite. It was a physical thing, a storm of sound that seemed to shake the frescoes on the vaulted ceiling. It was a roar of shock, of respect, and of pure, high-octane schadenfreude. In the Celeste Grand Ballroom, a king had been executed, and a new, unknown monarch had just been crowned. Eleanor stood at the podium, bathed in the white light, letting the sound wash over her. She didn't smile. She didn't bask. She simply waited, her calm a terrifying counterpoint to the chaos she had unleashed. Across the room, the scene was one of social devastation. Richard Vance was a black hole. The people at his table, the ones who had been laughing with him an hour before, had physically recoiled. A half-full glass of champagne had been knocked over, a pale stain spreading across the white linen, an insignificant mess in the face of the billion-dollar one he had just become. He was sitting, but he wasn't really there. His eyes were wide, fixed on the woman at the podium. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, not just his wife. The applause finally began to die down, not because the crowd was finished, but because they were desperate for what came next. The silence that fell was more charged than the ovation had been. Then, the room moved. It was not a stampede. It was a realignment, as if a new, massive gravitational body had just appeared in the solar system. The crowd, which had been orbiting Richard and the other titans of industry, now surged en masse toward her. But the first person to reach her side was not a reporter or a socialite. It was a man in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair and eyes that still burned with a fierce intelligence. It was Dr. Samuel Hastings, a Nobel laureate in physics, a man who had forgotten more about quantum mechanics than Richard Vance had ever known. He didn't grab her hand. He didn't gush. He simply looked at her, his head tilted. "Dr. Sinclair," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "I knew it." Eleanor's face, cold and mask-like for the entire speech, softened almost imperceptibly. "Dr. Hastings, your 2008 paper," he continued, ignoring the flashes of 100 iPhones, "on predictive modeling in non-linear systems. The one you wrote on the Sinclair resonance algorithm? I cited it in 2011. It was foundational. And then you just vanished." "I was occupied, Samuel," Eleanor said. "You were hiding," Hastings corrected, but not with judgment, with awe. "You've been running the most disruptive philanthropic fund on Earth from a living room, while he flicked his eyes toward Richard, was playing CEO with your toys. My God, woman, what you must have seen." "I've seen a great deal of inefficient data," Eleanor replied, her voice crisp, "and a lot of wasted potential." Before Hastings could reply, he was gently but firmly displaced by a woman in a severe, elegant Acris suit. "Dr. Sinclair, I'm Amira Taylor, president of MIT. Our fusion lab has been trying to get a meeting with the Vanguard Trust for 2 years. We've hit a wall with plasma containment." "I know," Eleanor said. "Your team is relying on a tokamak model that's 40 years old. You're trying to brute force the problem. The answer isn't more power. It's a better predictive algorithm for the field resonance. I read your team's last 3 grant proposals. They were uninspired." Amira Taylor, a woman who regularly stared down senators, blinked. You read them personally?" "The trust is me, Dr. Taylor. I read everything. Send me a new proposal. And this time, focus on the software, not just the hardware. I will expect it on Monday." Dr. Taylor nodded, speechless, and stepped back. A senator took her place, then an Undersecretary of State. They weren't congratulating her on her dress. They weren't asking about her husband. They were pitching her on carbon sequestration, on global supply chain logistics, on cybersecurity. And she, Dr. Eleanor Sinclair, stood there and, with the precision of a surgeon, answered every single one. She spoke of regression analysis, of Bayesian filters, of quantum annealing. This was not a ballroom. It was her new boardroom. The little brown mouse wasn't just built for the library. She was the library. Across the room, the vulture had landed. Isabella Dubois, her eyes glittering with the feral hunger of a predator that had just witnessed the kill of a lifetime, glided toward Eleanor. Her Vogue column was already an afterthought. This was front-page New York Times-level drama. She would sell this story for a fortune. She pushed past a hedge fund manager. "Dr. Sinclair! Dr. Sinclair!" Isabella Dubois, Vogue. An incredible, incredible story. The greatest social reversal I have ever witnessed. The world is dying to know. Was this planned? Was this all an elaborate act of revenge? The circle of scientists and politicians paused. This was the human question, the real question. Eleanor turned her gaze to Isabella. It was like being examined under a microscope. "Revenge, Miss Dubois," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more chilling than her public address, "is an emotional act. It's inefficient. It implies passion. What you saw tonight was not passion." "What was it then?" Isabella breathed, her phone recording. "It was a balance sheet correction," Eleanor stated. "My primary asset, the intellectual property of Apex Dynamics, was being leveraged by a corrupt executive to commit fraud. A fraud that would have destroyed my entire portfolio, including the Vanguard Trust. I simply corrected the error. I removed the liability." Isabella was typing so fast she was nearly trembling. "A liability? You mean your husband, Dr. Vance, your marriage?" Eleanor held up a single finger, and Isabella stopped talking. "Mr. Vance and I had a contract, however unwritten. He provided a public-facing brand, a face, as he was so fond of saying. In exchange, I allowed him to live a life of extreme luxury and perceived success, all while I did the actual work. He breached that contract tonight, not just by laughing at me, but by trying to defraud the company I built." She leaned in, just slightly. "I am Dr. Eleanor Sinclair. Vance was a trademark he used to sell my product. Consider that trademark permanently expired." "And Ms. Dubois?" "Yes? You spelled Schiaparelli wrong in your last column. It's Schiaparelli. Details matter. You should try them." Isabella Dubois, for the first time in her life, flushed. She had been, in the kindest, most surgical way possible, dismissed. While the new center of gravity consolidated, the old one was collapsing. Richard Vance was still in his chair. The world had become a muffled, roaring tunnel. He could see the flashes. He could see people looking at him, but he couldn't hear them. He was, for the first time in his life, truly, unequivocally alone. The men he golfed with, the VCs he drank with, the women he'd flirted with. They all avoided his gaze. He was contagious. He was a dead man. "Mr. Vance!" The voice cut through the fog. A young, sharp-faced man was leaning over the table. David Hayes from the Wall Street Journal. His phone was out, recording. "Mr. Vance, is the SEC report accurate? Did you attempt to use leveraged stock to acquire a fraudulent patent to hide a Q3 loss? Mr. Vance, is Apex Dynamics insolvent? Were you aware your wife was EV?" Richard looked at him, his mouth opening and closing. No sound came out. The bluster, the charm, the supernova confidence. It was all gone. The fuel line had been cut. It's a mistake," he finally stammered. The voice that had boomed across this room was a pathetic, dry rasp. A misunderstanding. She's not well. She's confused. I am the CIO. I am Mr. Vance?" A new voice. This one was polite, professional, and backed by 250 pounds of muscle. Two of the event's security guards, both ex-NYPD, were standing by his chair. They were not aggressive, but their presence was absolute. "Sir, the host has asked that you leave." Richard's head snapped up. The fog of shock was momentarily burned away by a flare of his old, pathetic arrogance. "Leave? I'm not leaving. This is my party. I was the guest of honor." "Sir, please don't make a scene," the first guard said, his voice a quiet, non-negotiable rumble. His hand rested gently on Richard's shoulder. "Get your hands off me!" Richard shrieked, batting the hand away. "Don't you know who I am?" "Yes, sir," the second guard said, moving to his other side. "We do." and we've been asked to escort you out. You can walk, or we can assist you. It's your choice." They didn't wait for an answer. In one smooth, practiced motion, they each took an elbow and lifted him. His chair scraped back. The last of his dignity evaporated. He was being handled. He was being removed. "Ellie!" he screamed. It was a desperate, cracking, pathetic sound. "Ellie, stop this! Tell them! It's our money! It's ours! Ellie, please!" 100 yards away, Dr. Eleanor Sinclair was in a deep, animated discussion with Dr. Hastings about plasma physics. She didn't so much as flicker an eyelash in the direction of the scream. She didn't even hear it. The walk was the longest of his life. The entire 1,000-person crowd watched as the great Richard Vance, the shark of Silicon Valley, was hustled, half-stumbling, between two guards. They didn't take him to the grand frescoed exit. They guided him left, past the gilded bar, toward a simple, unmarked door. A door he had never even noticed. One guard pushed it open. "Staff only." The door swung shut behind him, cutting off the light, the sound, and the perfumed air of the ballroom. He was in a grey, concrete corridor. The air smelled of stale cigarettes, industrial bleach, and the faint, greasy odour of the kitchens. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "This way, sir," the guard said, his politeness now just a thin veneer over raw efficiency. They marched him down the hall, past racks of clean tablecloths and busboys sorting silverware. He was invisible to them. He was just another piece of trash being taken out. They came to the freight elevator. The doors opened with a metallic groan. He was pushed inside. They descended. The elevator opened onto a concrete loading dock, exposed to the cold October night. Rain was beginning to drizzle. His black town car was there, but his driver, Miguel, was not. Two men in impeccably tailored, dark grey suits stood by the car. They were not event security. They were something else. Their faces were calm, their eyes flat. They looked like they belonged to a different, more serious world. "Mr. Vance," the first one said. His voice was not threatening. It was an invoice. "We're with Dr. Sinclair's personal security team. We will be taking you to your lawyer's office." I want my driver," Richard stammered. "Miguel's services are no longer required. Please get in the car, sir." It was not a request. Richard looked back at the freight elevator. The guards were gone. The steel door was shut. He looked at the two men. He looked at the black car. He was no longer a CEO. He was no longer a husband. He was cargo. Defeated, he slid into the back seat. The door shut with a heavy, final thud. Back in the ballroom, Jack Atherton materialized at Eleanor's side. The crowd around her was still 3 deep, but Jack, as the host, parted them with his quiet authority. "My dear," he murmured, his eyes twinkling. "A masterpiece. A brutal, beautiful masterpiece. I've never had a more successful gala." "Jack, thank you for your staging," Eleanor replied, all business. "The donation to your foundation will be processed in the morning." I never doubted it," he smiled. "My car is waiting at the south entrance. Your personal team is there. I suggest you leave before the New York Post arrives. They tend to be less civilized than Vogue." Eleanor nodded, but before she could move, a figure darted through the crowd. It was Aris Thorne. Her face was a wreck of tears and smeared mascara, but her eyes were on fire. "Dr. Sinclair!" she cried, grabbing Eleanor's arm. $100 million. I can't. How?" Eleanor turned, and for the first time all night, her face truly warmed. The icy strategist disappeared, and the mentor, the woman who loved work, emerged. She took Aris's trembling hands in her own. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Yes, you can. You will. My fund manager, Mr. Harrison, will be at your lab at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I want you to go home, get some sleep, and write down a 5-year budget. Everything you need: new servers, a full staff, a second lab. A budget. Okay. I can do that, Aris whispered, trying to catch her breath. Good, Eleanor said. And when you're finished, I want you to double it. You've been thinking small for too long. Your algorithm was sound. You just needed a better data filter. Stop apologizing for your work and just do it. Now go save the world. Harrison will be in touch. She gave Aris's hands a final, firm squeeze, then turned and followed Jack. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She walked, not with arrogance, but with the quiet, unstoppable purpose of an ocean liner. She didn't look at anyone. She just moved. Jack led her not to the main entrance, but to a private, velvet-roped elevator. 2 men in dark suits, the same model as the ones now escorting Richard, were waiting. They nodded. Dr. Sinclair. The elevator descended. The doors opened onto a quiet marble lobby, empty save for a gleaming, black, armored Maybach idling at the curb. One of the men opened the car door. "Home, Ma'am?" "No," Eleanor said, sliding on to the cool leather. "The secondary office." The door shut with a heavy, soundproof click, sealing her off from the world. The car pulled silently into the rain-slicked New York streets. Her phone, which had been on silent, was glowing on the seat next to her. 52 missed calls, 148 text messages. She ignored them all. She opened her briefcase and pulled out her encrypted laptop. She tapped a few keys, connecting to the Vanguard Trust's secure terminal. She pulled up the file she had already created. Thorn Aris. Project. Microplastic enzyme. She looked out the window at the blurred lights of the city passing by. She wasn't thinking of Richard. She wasn't thinking of the laughter. She wasn't thinking of the gasps, or the applause, or the look of ruin on her husband's face. She was thinking, the Bayesian filter I gave her. It's a patch. It's too slow. But if she links it to a quantum annealing process, if she can get access to a real quantum computer, she could cut the protein folding simulation time by 90%. She pulled up another file. Project D-Wave Acquisition. Dr. Eleanor Sinclair, founder, CEO, and chief architect, leaned her head back against the headrest. The party was over. The real work was just beginning. In one night, Richard Vance lost his company, his wife, and his name. He went from a tech god to a pariah, a footnote in his own wife's biography. The little brown mouse he laughed at turned out to be the lion who owned the entire jungle. Eleanor Sinclair's story is a brutal, powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. She didn't just get revenge, she reclaimed her past and seized her future. The spotlight didn't just shift to her, it had been hers all along, and she simply decided it was time to step into it. What did you think of Eleanor's move? Was it brilliant justice or a cold-hearted takedown? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories where the underestimated rise up and take it all, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more.